Hi, this is Gayle with BERNINA of Naperville, and welcome to our Serger Club for August. Now, this is a pretty fun one. We are making a patchwork pillow with some cover stitch and chain stitch embellishments. Now, here's the deal. I want you to sit down and close your eyes and picture what is it as a piecer or a quilter that you have always dreamed of. Do you have that picture in your head? Am I right if I tell you it is an endless bobbin? Or at least a bobbin the same size as your spool of thread? Well, guess what? If you have a Bernina or a Bernette cover stitch and overlock machine, you have an endless bobbin. You can piece all day without running out. And we're going to put that to the test with all of this patchwork piecing that we're doing on this pillow. So let me just remind you how Serger Club works. So we do a monthly video. I have a discount coupon if you choose to buy the subsequent lesson plans that go along with this free video that you're watching. And I mean, the club admission itself is less than the discount that you're going to get, so it's good. You get some good stuff with this, and then I give you some additional instructions and things like that. So I would really love it if you would take the plunge and purchase Serger Club from us. It's right there on BERNINAofNaperville.com. Just search Serger Club, and we are in 2025, and this is August, so that's the one that you're going to want to pick if you want to make this cute pillow. Now, this pillow is a pattern called the Criss0Cross Pillow, and it was designed by Amanda Murphy. And she basically has the cutting instructions and the layout and all of that. I'm just teaching you some of the ways that I did it to put it together. Well, you know, I've got a lead foot as fast as possible, right? But then we're gonna do some other little things with some fancy thread. Now, my pillow here that you see was made with Eleganza 8-weight cotton thread. Now, the Eleganza that we have is the Sue Spargo kind that comes on the cone that makes it really easy for us to use on our serger. In the demonstration, I'm gonna be using Dazzle and Glamour. Glamour is 12 weight, Dazzle is 8 weight. And this, of course, all the heavy threads for this application are going in our cover stitch looper. So why don't I stop talking? Let's go over to the presentation deck that you're gonna get if you sign up for Serger Club, and let's see, some other little details.
So we know it's an endless bobbin, right? But what that really means is that sergers pull thread from a much larger source, as you know, cones and other thread spools, right? So imagine if your sewing machine had a bobbin that could use a whole spool of thread. Well, that's what you can do with a serger, because whether you're going to do your 1/4 inch seams in the overlocker side, where it's that wrapped edge, or you're doing it with a chain stitch, your thread source is coming from full spools of thread or cones, not tiny bobbins. Now, let's be fair, our Berninas have jumbo bobbins, but still, it's a much smaller amount of thread on a jumbo bobbin than it is on a cone of thread. And my favorite is the chain stitch because you're only using 2 cones of thread, 1 cone for the needle, 1 cone for your quote unquote endless bobbin. So that's why I've chosen stitch number 32, which is the 2 thread chain stitch with the needle in the center cover position. Now, cover stitch is enabled on the following machines. I talk about Bernette and Bernina. There's the Bernina L890 and the L890QE, but then there's some other retired models like the 1300 MDC. There was a cover stitch only that was the 009 DCC, and then going way back in the Wayback Machine, there was the 2500 DCE and 2500 DCET. Now, in the current Burnett line, we have our B42 cover stitch only, the B48 combo, the B62 cover stitch only. Now, remember the 60s, 62, 68, and 68 maker are the air threaders. And then there's the B68 combo. And then I did mention the maker. And the maker is the newest Burnett air threading serger. It's essentially the same as the B68, but it comes with a ton of fun accessories, including that little vacuum cleaner attachment and those teal guides that everybody wants, right? Especially those of you that have the 64. But don't fret, they will be available as separate items come April, but I think you're going to have them in white and not in teal. So there's some other accessories that you're going to need. The C13 cover slash chain stitch foot that comes standard with your Bernina L890 or L890 QE, but just in case you want a second or you lost yours, you can purchase that. There's also the C27 clear overlock foot and the seam guides for the sergers. I want to show you this shank. So this is a shank that came on the original L890 machines. There's also a shank for the 850 that also looks similar, but it won't fit. You know, they're two different shanks. But look here, do you see how there's no hole that goes through this piece? Well, if yours looks like this, then you need to get a replacement shank because we're going to be using these seam guides. Now, these are the seam guides for the serger. And yes, they are the same seam guides if you have a walking foot, a Bernina walking foot. So if you have a Bernina walking foot, you can use your left and right guides from that item. But if you don't, then you can buy these little guys in a package like this. So the reason why we want the new shank is because if we use the old shank, we can't fit our guides through to adjust the space because there's no hole. But this way, if you get that new shank, you'll see as we use this, we'll be able to use our seam gauge to gauge 3/4 of an inch away from needle center and 1/4 inch if we wanted a little guide or for any other measurements. It expands up to about 3.5 inches here, like that. So that's that. So you're also going to need some fusible woven. We'll get to that in a moment, but you're going to need, I'd say, about 1.5 yards of that. And then I have this Home Sweet Haunt fabric that I just love. Now, mostly it's 1/2 yard is going to do way more than you need, but whatever you back your pillow with, you're going to need about 1 yard of. And I back mine with the Ruby Star speckled in metallic. And then when we're positioning those guides, we're going to need a seam gauge. And we have Bernina of Naperville ones that are pretty handy. And of course, whip out that cover stitch lock tool that came with your L890. We have a serger foot special, so the C27, the C13, the seam guides, and for those of you that need the shank, I have put these on sale using your special discount code, and you'll get 25% off. Now, you use that code at checkout, and if you need help, just give us a call at our store. Okay, let's get over to the drawing board. What I wanted to emphasize with this is our endless bobbin. Oh my goodness, I would have had to change my bobbin a couple of times. So working with that huge spool of serger thread makes it super duper easy. So I'm using 2 spools of Serger. This is polyester thread, and I'm using this through the needle and the chain for when I'm doing my piecing with the number 32 chain stitch. That's the chain stitch where the needle is center cover. So my machine is threaded up with the Serger thread in the needle and the cover stitch looper, and it is stitch number 32 with the needle in the center cover position. So I'm going to use my little seam gauge to just show that that needle from this foot is 1/4 of an inch. So I'm just going to use the side of my presser foot as my guide for when I sew my little squares together. So let's go over to the drawing board and see the layout of how we're going to sew our squares together. So as you can see, the pillow is set at an on point layout. That means that the squares don't make a grid, they make diamonds. So when we do that, we need setting corners and setting triangles. So let's talk about that. I've got my handy dandy little revolving cutter and an 8.5-inch ruler. So we have to cut larger squares of our background fabric, and so 2 of them need to be cut corner to corner like this. And I've got 2 stacked on top of each other. Now, there's two more that we need to cut in half diagonally twice. And these are for the setting side triangles. These are the corners and these are the side pieces. And what we need to do with this is we need to make one cut and we're not going to move anything. See how I got a little bit eager there? So you leave everything in the position just like it's supposed to be. Then we can either turn around or cut in another direction with our ruler. And we're going to line this up corner to corner. And this will ensure that this is an accurate cut. And now we've got 8 of these triangles and 4 of these. Now, Amanda has all kinds of tips and tricks in her pattern on accurately and easily sewing all of these pieces together. But I'm just going to do our little layout to kind of give you an idea because you're going to follow the pattern in order to do this because we have the pattern listed in our presentation deck and you can click right there, support Amanda. She has a lot of traveling that she has to pay for and keep up with and you know what I mean. Okay, so there's our basic layout of how we're going to sew our pieces together. So I'm just going to start sewing in pairs and chain piecing so that I'll just have a long strip of little pairs of squares sewn together. Then we'll liberate those, press them, and sew the pairs together, and then complete the pillow top. But let's just get to the meat and potatoes and just stitch that 1/4 inch seam, right? So here's my process. I'm going to sew the black ghosts onto the sage green skeletons, and I'm always going to have the black on top. I like to line this up so my fabric isn't quite yet to the needle. This is ensuring that I'm sewing right on the very edge of the fabric. And now I'm sewing off the edge. I'm taking another pair together. And I'm lining that right up to the needle, sewing off the edge a little bit, taking another pair, and I just complete this process until all of my sage and black pairs are sewn together. So now we have a long chain pieced item. So we're just gonna flip this over, press. You can see I sewed my pairs of the center squares as well. And you just might want to have your snips to cut them. And I'm just going to press to the black. And then we're going to take this over to the machine again, and we're going to stitch our pairs together according to the layout of the pattern. But the pairs are going to get stitched together just like we did our single squares here. Once you've sewn all of your pairs together to form the rows, you're going to sew the 2 middle rows together so that we can add a setting triangle onto a corner. And I'm making sure that my junctions line up together. So let's have a look here at what we have so far. So you can see that I made my initial 2 rows there. So now we have some other pieces. So now we're just going to sew those rows together, and like magic, it's going to be ready for embellishing. And now we're just going to fold our setting triangle and pinch to find the center so that we can line that up right sides together with that center marking right at my seam. And we're going to repeat that for the other side. We're going to sew I call them end caps, but they are those side setting triangles onto the ends of your rows. Then you're going to sew your rows together. One thing to be mindful of is that when you sew your rows together with those setting triangles, you're going to have a little puppy ear. And so I think of sticking my puppy ear where it's like a quarter of an inch lies right in the little V created by the puppy ear. So as you're pinning those together and putting them together, you might want to pay attention to that. And then once you're ready to put the corners on, you're going to have that same little puppy ear situation. And of course, as I do each one of these sections, I'm pressing, then I come back and I stitch, and then I press. So once your piece is sewn together, we need to add the borders. And the instructions have you cut 2 shorter ones that you're going to add to the top and to the bottom. This is still using our 1/4 inch on our cover stitch, number 32 stitch on our L890. So we're going to sew top and bottom, press, then add the long sides and press. Here's the pillow, and this is with the Eleganza thread. I used a yellow 8-weight and an orange 8-weight that you saw. And I think this is super cute, but let's just see how this might come alive with our metallics. I think that's going to be fun. And I just love to play, especially if I'm going to make 2 things. I want to have them look a little bit different. Isn't this cute? I mean, in all honesty, I wouldn't mind having a quilt that's made up of all blocks like this to just cuddle up in the fall. But we've got some embellishing to do. So before we can do the embellishing, Amanda is recommending that you add fusible woven to the back of this piece. Now, fusible woven comes about 15 inches wide like this, so I needed to cut 2 pieces, and then I'm just going to overlap slightly on the back. So before, I'm not really measuring, I'm just going to cut it even with my fabric like this. And then just so you know, we're going to be trimming this down one more time after we do our embellishment stitches. So the first stitch we're going to sew is a 3-thread cover stitch. Now, Amanda uses a 4-thread where there's a left cover, right cover, and center cover needle, but I'm just using the right cover and the left cover needle. And I'm going to be using the Glamour in the cover stitch looper when I do this. And just in case there was any confusion, the fusible woven gets ironed to the wrong side of our work. So we're going to turn that over like so. And we're going to just need a marking pen of some kind for some registration marks. And the idea, if we look at the pattern, is that you're going to do our 3-thread wider stitch, right? Kind of goes right down the middle of our squares, kind of this argyle sort of design. And then the chain stitch with what we're going to put the razzle in, you can draw your lines down the middle and follow them perfectly, or that's where our seam guides come in handy and our clear foot, because we can see exactly where that clear foot is going to go, right? So in my opinion, we already have a line right here that we can see. So I'm not going to be doing any marking unless you really were tempted to kind of mark the centers of the squares like Amanda does or whatever. I don't know if that's really that important. Okay, so here's a public service announcement. This is the Gayle after I stitched the embellishment. So what I'm recommending that you do is that you draw lines just in the perimeter when you're getting started, because otherwise you're kind of guessing where you need to start with how the guide is positioned. So use this diagram that you see here on the left of the screen as a way to reference how you're going to mark. You're going to extend the seam. So you're going to draw an imaginary line if that seam continued over the whole fabric. Just my little 2 cents, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to find the center of these squares. And, theoretically, we cut 3.5 inches, I believe, something like that. They should finish at 3 inches. So that means that this should be about 1.5 inches. But it's essentially 3 inches. So that intersection should be coming right down the middle there. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our guide and we're going to put that on our machine at 1.5 inches because that's half of our 3-inch finished square. And then we're going to thread up our glamour. That's going to go right through the tubes, no thread cradle necessary. And we're going to keep that Serger in our needles on our left needle and our right needle. So, and then don't forget this little foot goes on the machine too. So we're going to slip our right seam guide from the right side to the left side through our shank. And we're going to use our seam gauge to measure 1.5 inches. There is a 1.5 inch marking on our seam gauge. And then we're just going to double check. It does also say 1.5 inches on our table, but I wanted to make sure that was the measurement from our cover center needle position. And then we're threading our candlelight through without issue there through our air threading mechanism. And now I'm just going to thread the needles with my needle threader. I don't know how I would live without this guy. And then we're ready to get started. Let's remind ourselves that we're working upside down on this project. And I've set my seam guide 1.5 inches from center needle position. Even though I don't have a center needle, it's from that position that this is at 1.5. And now I'm going to use that guide to run along one of my stitched seam lines. So we're going to start like right here. You might want to use your marking pen if you need help keeping it straight from this point forward. You can see here, I'm kind of eyeballing it, but if you're somebody that, struggles with sewing straight, now would be the time to make those markings there if you need them. And once again, you might need to make a line here so that you have something for your guide to follow. And at this point, I won't chain off with these. I will pull with my cover stitch lock tool, cut, then gently pull this through and cut. And there you see our first pass. Now, we just need to do this a fair number of times. Now, also, I started up here. Cover stitches have a little bit of pile to them. I mean, if you're not a picky person, it probably doesn't matter, but they do look a little different if you stitch one this way and one up this way. So you might consider always working from the same direction. So I'm going to go from here, start, end, start, end, start, end. Then I'm going to slide it over, rolling this piece and start, end, rather than being tempted to rotate. Now, this could also be a spot where you want to draw because I don't really have a seam. I am winging it, but you might want to draw that line. Okay, now I'm going to switch to the other side, but I'm not rotating my work. I'm going to keep going in the same direction. And you might have to roll this side up a little bit just to get everything tucked and out of the way. So once you've gone all the same direction to cover one way, now we're going to come back this way and do the same thing. So we should be looking at our cover stitches perpendicular to our foot here. And all the same rules apply. We're going to make all of these going the same direction. Okay, so let's learn how we could have been better with this. So I think I should have drawn my line because this little dude kind of went out into outer space. But I'm not going to lament because we need to still trim this down and we have a lot of other things to add here. So now I'm going to use a thread cradle and I'm going to thread up the razzle and I'm going to remove my right cover needle and my left cover needle and insert the center cover needle and set up for that stitch number 32 again, which is the chain stitch, 2-thread chain stitch with the needle in the center position. And just as a reminder, with this dazzle in the cover stitch looper, it will not go through the air threader. So we do have to make a thread cradle, and I use a thread cradle out of the Serger thread. Just take a long piece, fold it in half, and stick the cut edges down through the looper with the air threading. Make sure that you have your finger around the loop, and then feed the dazzle or any thicker thread through that and pull the thread through the machine. And don't forget to reset your seam allowance guide to 3/4 of an inch using your seam gauge. And this one's going to take a little bit longer because this technique is doing double the amount of stitching. And I'm just going to travel in the seam allowance. And there you can see our chain stitching. So I just need to finish this the same way that I made the other one. So I'm just going to cover this whole work until it looks like the picture. Okay, so here is our embellished pillow top. And I want this to measure 20.5 inches because that's about the size I have for a pillow form. And I have a 20.5 inch ruler that I'm just going to place on this so I can see, if I can trim up some of my oogie messes there. Oh, this will be awesome. So I'm just going to go ahead and trim this up and I'm cutting, I'm not doing a button back. I am doing an envelope back. And so I'm going to need to cut two 20.5 inch wide by 24-inch rectangles and fold them in half so that so we can have our envelope back. So this has been trimmed up to 20 inches. And these are my 24 by 20.5 inch rectangles that are folded wrong sides together to create this envelope backing. And now I could either do my 1/4 inch with my foot and the number of C13 and the chain stitch, or I could convert my machine back to a 4 thread overlock stitch, and I'm going to do it a little bit wide just so I can have a neat finished pillow on the inside. Once we've serged around the pillow, it's time to turn it inside out and give it one last pressing. And then we can compare which pillow we like better. Do we like choice A with our eleganza thread, a little bit brighter, no sparkle? Or do we like a more moody look with our metallic threads? It's up to you, your choice.
All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this video and you give at least an endless bobbin a try. With that said, we've got a lot of videos for you to watch as well, and they all live over on our BERNINA of Naperville YouTube channel. It's easy. It's youtube.com/BERNINA of Naperville, and there you can like, comment, and subscribe. So now, all you overquilters out there, it's time to put your endless bobbin to the test. See ya.